It's the state of the dungeon. It's a video that Rob does about his games. Yeah! Hello once again, friends. I am Rob, and this is my State of the Dungeon address for the game that took place on the 11th of March 2021. The game was Mighty Protectors, and all players were in attendance, including a glorious return, sort of, for the player of Muscles, who, well, got thrown right into the fire. He started up, the scene opens up. He's in jail. Jail for Muscles doesn't mean he's in a cell. Honestly, there's no cells that could hold him as strong as he is. He can crush concrete easily, and it would take an inordinately thick metal in order to hold him in place. It would literally take tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of metal to hold him in place. So they didn't do that. Instead, he was suspended in the middle of this gymnasium-sized room with bungee cords around his wrists and his ankles, holding him in place. The room is also rigged so that it can spray in knockout drugs, because he is not resistant to that. But he is stretched out to the point, he's not uncomfortable because his strength is far more than the tension of the bands. But on the other hand, he can't get a grip on them, and as much as he may jerk violently, the bands are up to that. So he is well and truly trapped as he is in prison. He is entertained. There is a video screen. They can watch TV. He can move enough so that he can eat and get access to anything he needs to. He just can't move out of that spot. He's fed well, for the most part taken pretty good care of, but obviously he'd like his freedom. After about a week after he was taken into custody from the base, Muscles is, well, he gets a visitor. The very same woman that he ripped the arms off of, the group's kind of commanding officer slash adjutant slash, I don't know, whatever. But Veronica shows up, Ms. Veronica Murphy, and she basically lays it out for him. She is dropping the charges against him for any aggravated assault or anything like that, if he'll agree to behave. That's it. She leaves it in very broad terms, that if you can restrain yourself and not rip people's arms off, unless they really, really deserve it, you can go free. If you can stop from that kind of violent behavior, you need to control yourself. And if you don't, she laid it out very clearly, he will not survive a bloodbath. So, he understands that she's got quite a bit of stroke, so he agreed, because, quite honestly, the rest would be just being thrown in jail and not getting to have any fun with the superpowers. Also, it was made quite clear that he only demonstrated his super strength. He really doesn't have any outlets that most people know about for his other remaining powers. Between his corrosive spit attack, he very seldom used that, and his duplication ability, I can't remember only one time that he actually used that. So, and that wasn't televised to anybody, so it's still very much a wild card that he can do these things. So, nobody still knows about these things, and so he is released. Veronica offers to send him to Munich to meet up with some old friends who are just about to have a grand adventure. He agrees, and when the group is together talking in Bulwark's room about what they're going to do next and their vacation that they've been given, knock on the door, and it's Muscles, with a note explaining how he's free and back with the group. The group took him back with pretty much open arms. There was a little jockeying and a little bit of banter, but nothing too seriously. Mostly bad puns on my part. I was on fire. There was some mention that Bulwark had repaired and replaced Veronica's arms. She now has cybernetic arms. That was something that Bulwark was able to do. And the joke was that he would be able to replace any limbs that were torn off by muscles. So I jested that it sounded like they had a real arms race on their hands. Ha ha ha. But anyhow, they were talking a little bit, and then basically they spilled to Muscles that there was an event coming up in Munich, GiftedCon, which was a hastily thrown together convention for Gifted, so that people could come and see them, so the Gifted could show up and show off and introduce themselves. And apparently somebody had organized all this. They've quickly found out at least one of the partners that put this together, as the next person to knock on their door and enter their room is a Mr. Seaver. Mr. Seaver is a slick-looking businessman, platinum-colored suit and perfectly coiffed hair, and just one of those good-looking guys who probably doesn't have bad days very often. Came into the room and immediately, happy to meet all of you. Pleasure. All right, so surely you've heard about GiftedCon. We tried to invite you, but you have been busy, so we haven't been able to. And quite honestly, we've been stonewalled at your home office. They haven't allowed us to extend the invitations, but you certainly are invited. Matter of fact, it would please us to no small degree if you wanted to be a part of GiftedCon, considering your role in the gifted community. Remember, the group actually were the first people to out the gifted. They made a video that was not able to be quashed and introduced. We have superpowers. We are the gifted. Lots of people are going to start having these powers, so we're just the first. And Takeshi and Muscles both revealed themselves. That would be Bulwark, and Muscles is Mr. Z. We are the gifted. And your neighbors may be the gifted, and it's going to be strange, but it's a different world, and we're not scary monsters. We're just folks who got powers. So, Mr. Seaver's like, hey, if you guys want anything, first of all, obviously it's free for you guys to come in. You're VIPs. If you want to come in as yourselves, you got VIP badges and anything you want. You want to have chaperones making sure that you get to the front of any line and can see or do anything, you got it. If you want to hold a panel, we would be over the moon happy for that. If you want to, have a Q&A for people who want to know more about you, we'll gladly facilitate that. We'll squeeze you into the schedule. Somehow we'll find a way to make it happen. You will be celebrities there among the celebrities, because you are some of the most famous gifted, albeit some of that is infamy, looking at Muscles. Because remember, he was the victim of a bad smear campaign where his act of infamy in ripping Veronica's arms off was publicized. So, made him look like a monster. Even though all his debts are cleared and everything is squared away, there's still going to be that perception. So the group is like, well, we'd like to go. Okay, that's not quite true. Most of the group said, yeah, okay, we'll go. Yeah, that sounds fun. Or Rook did not want to have any of it. Rook was like, wait a second, you're having all of these superpowered people in one area. This is a disaster waiting to happen. Something horrible is going to happen. This is just bad, and I don't want any part of it. And the others cajoled and teased and did everything they could. Eventually, they thought they were going to even have to roofie him, but eventually he agreed to go. But here's the thing. They had options. First of all, they had a day before, so they all could get ready. Now remember, Sentinel doesn't quite look like Sentinel did, and Sentinel's always had his costume on in those few times when he was, being videoed or anything like that, and his costume always had a full mask. So his personal identity is not known to the greater masses. And since he had that little incident in Georgia, his hair is completely white after being possessed by, roughly 100 ghosts. So his hair is white. So he went off and he got it cleaned up, and he dyed the tips blue. Like, okay, that's kind of cool. All right. you're in Germany. There's some interesting subcultures there. You're really not going to stand out that terribly. Yeah, that's cool. So he's happy about that. Most of the group got, straightened up. Of course, Takeshi had been badly burned in that chemical fire. Even though he got healed via his magical MacGuffin, his hair was still singed and looked patchy, and his clothes were not in great shape. So he went to get straightened out a bit. Muscles didn't have his super suit anymore because they had ditched the super suits when Muscles had... and the rest of the group had, ditched the services and employ of their former boss, Lord Warbridge. So, those suits, which were pretty nice, went down with the plane as they escaped. So, it kind of turned around that he needed clothes. The group was given 5,000 euros advance to them by Veronica so that they could enjoy their vacation. And he took 4,000 euros and went and got a suit made that next day. Because he's so big, obviously they wouldn't have anything in his size. He's, 1,500 pounds. He is literally one of the biggest humans in the world at the moment. There are very few gifted, and most of them it's only as a result of a power that they can get even bigger. So he is huge. They had to take multiple measurements of his bicep to get the sleeves right. So he was a challenge for them, but they rose to it. He got a very nice black suit, white dress shirt, tie, looked good. So all the group is kind of getting ready for their own thing, and they all have their strategy. Of course, they still have Hank, the lawyer, with them, who, of course, Hank DeVille looks like a devil. He just kind of stands out no matter what. He can't really hide that anymore. The horns, the red skin, bright red skin, the orange eyes. It's kind of hard. The fangs, the tail he can tuck away, but the rest of it is kind of hard to hide. But hey, GiftedCon was around the bend. There were already people in costume running around, so in order to kind of perk him up a little bit, because it was really starting to sink in how his life had permanently changed with the gifts that he got, Ghost decided to take him out for a day on the town. And they enjoyed their time together. It turns out that they're both very marketable. However, while DeVille is... Well, he rolled for his cool just to see how people did with him, and he rolled natural 20. He has a gift that allows him to take a natural 20 and turn it around. It cost him a lot of power to do it, but he was willing to. So all of a sudden, he's a rock star. He's John Morrison. He's Freddie Mercury. He's, people mobbed him and thought he was the coolest thing. Ghost didn't do so well with her cool test. She bombed it pretty bad. So she got... just this creep was pestering her, just saying horrible things about her and her predilection for skin tight costume and stuff like that, and insinuating some pretty terrible things about the nature of some of her gifts. And seeing that she was being made uncomfortable, Hank stepped into traffic right in front of a car. The car slammed on his brakes, but Hank switched places using his special teleportation ability with the person who was heckling poor Ghost. So he got nailed by the car, and Hank just slipped off with her and no problems, leaving the creep getting hit by a car. Maybe not the nicest thing, certainly, but then again, Hank never said he was an angel. Nobody would believe him anymore anyhow. They had a chuckle at that. Hank can be kind of smooth when he wants to be. And honestly, his powers do help that considerably, considering he has his personality amplified by his gifts, his Devil's Own Luck ability. That's even without talking about his ability to blast necrotic energy. So he's got some interesting skills for sure. So the group found out from Seaver what the guest list is, and I'll recite it because these are all super characters that I came up with using these rules, because I just dashed out a bunch of different powers just to see. Now, most of these characters are not at the player's level. The players are beta level. which means they're not as powerful as some of the superheroes that will eventually come out, or super characters, the gifted, who will be the alphas. But they are considerably a step above many of these that are Delta, Gamma, and a couple even Omega level. So they're down the list. It goes Alpha, Beta, Delta, Gamma, Zeta, Omega. Omega, Zeta? Omega, Zeta. But these are the various characters who are also going to be in attendance. They were advertised for this con. They are Grime Lord, Stand-In, Shade, Techno, that's T-E-K-N-O, Symbiote, Dream Match, Clean Queen, Safety Cone, Respite, Pyroclast, Ramkin, Filbert Von Doom, Blue, Seraph, DeWaltz, Vince Smith, who formerly was known as the Great American Satan. He's a guy who could give Hank DeVille a run for his money in the Infernal looks. Canoness, Catapult, Darth Evader, Ripclaw, Catchpole, Nostradamus, the Ninja. Yes, the Ninja had escaped from the scrutiny of Veronica and escaped all the way to Germany for this. Apparently they found a way to get him there. Mr. Zombie, Bonjiro, Chamelzion, Lady Titania, Inwa Jubaz, Mr. Muscle, Ogre, Paradigm, Finesse, Searchlight, Apocalypse, Candyman, Shipwreck, Aquaboy, Ostracize, Fake News, Batman, and Batman, Melodion, Data Trip, Spider-Man, Sugar Rush, Mr. Universe, Gun Nut, Demon Lord Demonicus, Reincarnated Aleister Crowley, Beyonce. Yeah, Beyonce got gifts. More than one she already had. She apparently has the ability to stretch. However, they were warned by Seaver that she probably was actually not going to show up for this. Segmentum, AI, Thrill Kill, Lady Aphrodite, Day Trip, Boomtown, Boy Band, Cliff Notes, Skyrocket, and Mirror. So, an interesting group. And they had to wonder, were any of these the nemesis for any of the other characters who are here? Several of them haven't found theirs yet. The only ones who have been Psyghost and Muscles. So as far as who Bulwark's nemesis is, who Rook's nemesis is, and who Sentinel's nemesis is, they don't know. Could be any of these people? Possibly. So, they went to go check things out. First of all, there are going to be numerous panels and events for the Gifted themselves. Things about counseling, how to survive and how to profit using their gifts for the betterment of society, their own financial well-being, things like that. So there was clearly a lean in to help the Gifted. For whose benefit? Who knows? It appears on the outside possibly be humanitarian, but Supers is behind it, and Supers is a corporation trying to imprint every superhero with their image. They want to make the costumes for people so that their brand gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And quite honestly, they're doing a really scarily good job because they are one of the major contributors to GiftedCon. There's agents for them, and the ear of every single person who goes there who has gifted abilities. So there's definitely going to be some people who are walking around in threads from Supers before too long. Remember, Supers is the company that's actually founded by Puff Daddy, who is a huge fan of superheroes and wanted to get in on the ground floor. The group actually met Puff Daddy when it was just starting up. Now they have expanded quite a bit. They have sponsored numerous supers and things like that. So the group, basically, as I said, they kind of relaxed. Some of them got different clothing and things and got detailed up and everything. But ultimately, there wasn't a whole lot to do. They just relax because they were kind of wound up after some of the different activities they'd had. They just attacked a country. So, they could use a little bit of tension reducer. Over that time, I just kind of skipped over any injuries they already had. They're healed effectively. It wasn't really worth worrying about. So, then the next day after that was the opening day of GiftedCon. So they were awoken at 6 o'clock because their ride was going to be waiting for them. And they got basically one of these big Rockstar tour buses. And several of the Gifted were already on who were going to make appearances. They were all shocked to see these characters. Now, before everybody took off, there were some who made preparations. For instance, Sentinel now has a duplication ability. So what he did was he duplicated himself. He put his duplicate in his superhero costume and went incognito himself, getting a non-VIP badge so he could just look around and do things without being mobbed by people. Turns out that actually Sentinel, for being mysterious and not talking much, actually has pretty evocative powers with his repulsor blasts, and they've been seen in a couple of places. For example, he's one of the people that was really seen in Hong Kong fighting zombies. So there's a huge culture of people who love superheroes, and Sentinel was front and center on them twice. And again, pretty impressively, his repulsor blast powers are quite impressive. May not do as much damage, which actually could be a plus for a lot of people, but he's learned how to use them with finesse, so there's a lot of people who think he's really cool. He's also one of the only ones who doesn't fly, so he couldn't get away from the crowd so easily. So they ended up meeting Filbert Von Doom in the bus. Now, Filbert is an 11-year-old kid who has the ability to make power suits. He can make suits of armor. His current suit looked like a knight's armor, and he basically is basing his public image on Dr. Doom. So he made this kind of knightly looking power armor from materials he got from his mom's she shed. He's fun. He's not incredibly powerful, but again, he can cut a good image. And he accidentally blew out some of the windows on the bus by igniting his rocket gauntlets and blowing out a window. So he was yelled at by the bus driver, who turns out is another one of the Gifted, Ripclaw, who can turn into a werewolf. And he yelled at the boy, and the boy quieted down and stopped shooting out windows. So they drove to GiftedCon, which is a large Coliseum-style stadium, and then a 6-story building off to one side, and a large pavilion that's been stretched across a very large park across from the auditorium. Now, they heard of a couple of the attractions. Obviously, there's going to be meet and greets with a lot of the advertised Gifted, and that's what's going to draw a lot of people, clearly. And all the people who would go to Comic-Con, what would you do if Comic-Con actually had the real superheroes? I'm not just talking, say, Robert Downey on a talk, or Chris Hemsworth in a panel talking. No. Real Thor who can fire lightning bolts for show. Let you touch Mjolnir. Things like that. Think about what that would do to a Comic-Con. They'd be flooded with people who'd want to see all these people that they've only read about in comics. Meet the real Spider-Man? Oh yeah, it'd be incredible. So this place was packed. Munich was full to overflowing with people. But they were able to get through. It's nice to have connections. And the folks at Supers always had staffers around who made sure the problems generally tended to go away for them. So they were able to drive right up to the pavilion. They got in. Check-in for them was just being viewed by this camera, and they gave them badges and said, "You're good to go." Sentinel, with his cover identity as his dupe, just asked for and received another badge. So they found out there was a bunch of events. A number of the opening preliminary panels were going to be things like how to take care of your identity and how to keep your identity separate from your secret identity, because that's a big issue for some of these people. Another one was how to, you know, protect yourself in case of accidental damage in a super fight. For some people, that is a constant concern. So this was offered for them for opportunities to do things other than people watch or go and see things. They also found out that one of the major attractions to this, and another reason why people were just crushing in, was because if you get up to a certain package, you are allowed to go into that office building where a very special gifted, a young 12-year-old girl who goes by the name Respite is. Respite is a healer. She doesn't do injuries so much as she banishes disease and contagion. And she is currently keyed on destroying the coronavirus. She can actually, in a radius, drive out the coronavirus in people, purifying them if they are already afflicted, and suspending it indefinitely. Of course, can people then get it later? Hard to say, but she can give relief from it, and she can also make sure that anybody who goes through that place is not themselves carrying it or spreading it. So she can actually make one of the few places on Earth that people could stop wearing masks in a convention where everybody's wearing masks. It's fun. This is funny. The only one who actually went into that building, though, was Bulwark. He took his sister in because Bulwark wanted his sister to come along to this, and so he wired her the money to fly to go and to see the superheroes with him, which was kind of nice. It's touching. It's another that human element. And she wanted to see her. Actually, I think Bulwark wanted to see her more. And they got in to see her, and she was really happy to see Bulwark because she thinks he's great. As again, he is one of the most popular gifted in the world because he was the first person to take his mask off and say, "Hey, I'm Takeshi. I'm gifted. And if any of you are out there who have problems, you know, I'm here to listen, and I'm here to protect people, and I'll keep doing good where I can." So yeah, a lot of people took inspiration from him and his courage in doing that, which took a bit of courage. So, with that on the table, Takeshi actually had a relatively easy time because, again, while there was a crush of people who wanted to talk him, to meet with them, he wasn't sitting in a booth locked down in place. And the people from Supers were preventing him from being crushed by people. Plus, he was wheeling his sister around, so they definitely took aims to make sure that he could enjoy himself. Many of the group, the first thing they did was go off and start looking around at the different people who were there. There's a lot to take in. So some of the supers that they met, considering that a large portion of the floor of the stadium was given over to all these different booths where you could meet the actual gifted, there were a couple that jumped right out at them. The big ones were Lady Aphrodite. Now, Lady Aphrodite is an amazingly attractive woman. All the more so because everybody who sees her, no matter what their personal inclination, jealousy is banished when you see her. You just can't help but think that she is the most beautiful person ever. And it's actually her control over emotion manipulation is so fine, she stops people from wanting her, just marveling at how beautiful she is. She also has enhanced cool, so she has a natural 40 cool just walking around. She's something special. She's a beta level. She's quite powerful. And there was a huge line of people who just wanted to see her. She was charging $250 a photo for headshots. She's going to make some bank on this. And of course, you know, she's not going to want for any kind of employment. She's, you know, her powers are very marketable. They also saw Lady Titania, who was across the hall from her. Lady Titania, you know, wears generally tend to be earth tones. She's a little bit on the, maybe not the most beautiful, more of a seasoned woman, more matronly. But she's attended constantly by throngs of anima spirits, creatures of forest and fern that take care of all of her needs. They fill her water, and they carry her if she wants to make an entrance and things like that. So she's got some interesting powers. She's not beta level, but she's got some interesting stuff. I had so much fun playing around with these various characters. Rook was approached right away and had his hand shaken and everything by Pyroclast. Pyroclast really thinks the world of Rook. And Rook, again, not the flashiest of guys, but Pyroclast knows all of them and was really impressed with Rook. Pyroclast, of course, is a fire controller. He doesn't wear clothes, he wears fire. His control is so good that he can make cool fire, which is room temperature fire. It doesn't consume anything, it doesn't ignite anything. He can shake your hand while his hand is still ignited and he won't burn you unless he wants to. He can change his temperatures as he wishes, but, it gets him, clothes whenever he wants because can't see any of the other bits when he's got opaque fire covering it. He's got a lot of control over things like that, but he's not a fighter. Now, on the other hand, Extra Crispy, far superior to him in raw power, but nowhere near the kind of control that Pyroclast has. So it's interesting, going through those different dichotomies and different abilities that they have. Playing off, no single one has the same power sets as others, even if they have the same powers. I played around with all sorts of things with the enhancements and stuff. It's actually really fun to do stuff like that. They also found out that several of the characters, just by walking by, they could guess at some of their powers. Walking by Safety Cone, for instance, who is a man in a orange spandex bodysuit with silver stripe around his head, around his middle, and around his knees. You just felt safe. That's most of his power, is just putting people at ease. Which, of course, he's being courted as a hostage negotiator. So, he's got some interesting stuff. But yeah, a lot of them basically broke off to go and investigate things because most of them weren't too interested in the opening events. Sentinel's the only one, and he looked at one for financial consideration and safety. It was to him an interesting panel because they had actual credible financial experts who took a good educated look at the impact of Gifted, who could create and manipulate technology easily or create heightened levels of technology, as they've personally seen already. And also people who can completely and perfectly mimic other people's identities. There could be real issues with identity theft and financial manipulation. So they gave a comprehensive, lecture on some of the dangers and mentioned the different laws that were being passed to really crack down on Gifted who abuse their powers for these various purposes. Even though there's no foolproof way of stopping that from happening quite clearly because, well, their various powers from the Gifted are quite powerful and varied, mostly they talked about actually hiring a good firm to cover your needs that is actually employing Gifted against the very things that they're worried about, people cracking the financial basis of society, really. So, yeah, he got some use out of it, I suspect. Not that he deals with vast amounts of wealth right now, but, still. It's probably a good thing to know that the rest of the world is still going on and people have these concerns. Doing a little world building with this convention, so I'm having some fun with it myself. And I think generally people were receptive to hearing stuff about that. But mostly it was about meeting and greeting people and seeing all the different things. And basically what I did was I broke up the day and let them all do something in their time slot. Unfortunately, the player for Cyghost was under the weather and she had to leave the game. So she and Hank were walking around together, sometimes flying around together, and they're just generally having a good time. Hank was watching out for her, and she had to leave, unfortunately. So, but they did get to see something together. Basically, if you remember from when I gave the rundown of people, there were 3 Batmen. Now, several of the courts covering international copywriting have kind of retreaded some of the grounds of fictional characters. Because, quite clearly, if you make a movie and it involves Batman and DC isn't a part of it, they will sue you so hard. They will either stop your movie or they will take your movie and make all the money off of it, and you'll get nothing. Nothing at all. And probably a hefty fine. They don't take that lightly. But here's the thing. You can go right now and legally change your name to Batman. They can't do anything about it. So if a superhero decides they're going to call themselves Batman and take that on as their identity, it's a gray area. And obviously the Disney, with their ownership of everything Marvel, because again, this takes place in the real world, and the body that owns DC and all these other comics are very interested in how they're going to adapt to a gifted world. They see that there's potential for, you know, great profit and all kinds of fun things that they can do, but at the same time, they're in danger of some of their IPs just getting run roughshod. It's really hard to make as much off of Batman if a person going around calling themselves Batman goes and decides to be a thrill killer or something. Your name is going to get blackened. So they're watching nervously the whole thing too. So there were 3 Batmen though, and the group was interested because they were going to have a battle for the name. They were going to stage a fight between the 3 of them. The winner would get to be able to call themselves Batman. The other ones would have to change their name. Theoretically. How they were going to enforce that was not really well explained, but nobody was really all that curious. They just wanted to see Batman fighting Batman. And it was pointed out, too, that these guys only popped up when the Gifted emerged, so they were probably gifted. It only made sense that they would be, but Batman doesn't have superpowers. So how is this going to work out? Well, it turns out that the Batmen were people with small imaginations, but they were low-level gifted. They were not beta level. None of these guys were, but they had their abilities focused on something relatively simple. For example, the best-looking Batman had a great costume. It was actual armor, and it looked like it was cut right out of one of the movies, The Dark Knight, technically. And he had a utility belt with actual gadgets in it. He was a gadgeteer, so that was his superpower. Plus, he also had enhanced strength, but not exceptionally so. He had up to a 20 strength, which is not bad, but you know, it could be, you know, he's not in Muscles League, for instance, not by a long shot. So he was the most convincing looking Batman. I mean, he looked buff, ripped, good costuming and everything. He looked like he came right off of the movie set. The in-between guy actually had a pretty good cosplay Batman costume. It was foam. It wasn't, you know, armor that he was wearing, but it looked like he'd been to the gym. He was in fairly good shape, so kind of more like a Val Kilmer-esque from Batman and Robin, or Batman Forever? Batman Forever. Rather than, you know, Val Kilmer now, which does not look like Batman. And so they were the first 2 that were up. They were going to do a round-robin competition. And they had a fight, and they had a nice little martial arts bout. And eventually the bigger guy just reached in, hooked around, grabbed the smaller Batman's arm, and broke it. Convincingly winning. The fight was stopped, although the Batman insisted that he could have kept fighting, but they're like, no, you broke your arm. So he went off, and they put a healing cast on it that was actually going to repair his broken arm, showing some of the high tech that was available on site. So the more muscular Batman rested, so then the 3rd Batman showed up. The 3rd Batman was pitiable. He didn't look like he had worked out all that much. He had but a puny 12 strength. He was wearing what looked like a Halloween costume for Batman. Not a really great one either. So he was shorter than the other guy and distinctly underwhelming as Batman. Now, introduced to all of these these people was another part of the prize, besides getting the Batman name, was getting the services of one of the hottest copyright international or intellectual property lawyers, Mr. Tandy, who is very well known in those spheres for protecting and helping to clients who are accused of problems with copywriting and infringing. And he's got a ferocious reputation. His services were going to be given to whoever won too, so that they could take on the Disney lawyers. And there was people from Team DC, from Team DC who were watching. And they were actually hoping the cool Batman came off, because then they could deal with this. They could work with him, they could maybe groom him, maybe give him movie roles and stuff, and, they'd have a real honest-to-goodness Batman, and maybe they could make something with this. Well, then the fight started. It turns out that the little guy was also gifted, and his gift was on super reflexes. His defense rating was too high for the big lug to hit. He did hit him once or twice, but nothing serious, whereas the little wiry guy just dodged, evaded, and it really kind of ended up making a mockery out of the big guy, and he was getting winded to the point where he was going to go in and use one of his gadgets, but the smaller Batman went in and knocked loose his utility belt and just knocked him out. Just basically just throat punched him, and he went down. And he was accorded the winner. So he took the guy's utility belt as a trophy, because his costume didn't have one. It had a yellow cloth belt only. Well, Muscles was not impressed. He's like, I could beat that guy. And a lot of people are like, ooh. And I asked him, like, are you saying this out loud? He's like, yes, I am. And the guy who had won so far, the smaller Batman, says, all right, I'll take you. So they gave him 10 minutes to freshen up, and they booked the match. Now, Muscles didn't have his fighting gear on. He had his suit. But he met up the day prior with this one big bodybuilder who was cosplaying as him. He had a replica of the white suit that he had worn. And the guy was big, not nearly as big as Muscles. But he's like, hey, would you like to wear this suit? Sure. So the guy was left in his muscle suit, the one fake Muscles, on top of his already large muscles. So he was probably the closest to Muscles' actual size. But Muscles now had this really, honestly, too tight bodysuit on now that he was wearing. It was, small children probably should not have seen him in this, to be honest. And it only got worse after this. So they squared off in this fight, and the little guy beat him in initiative. So he reaches into the utility belt, because he's not going to try to punch and do anything serious. He doesn't want to get in hand-to-hand range. He reaches in the utility belt, he pulls out a couple of pods and throws them at him. And he hits quite comfortably, catches right in the upper torso. So I had Muscles make an endurance roll, his kryptonite, but he made it. Here's the thing was, though, that this Batman didn't know what the stuff in the utility belt was all for. So he threw it, and it turned out it was a cloth dissolver. All of a sudden, Muscles is having a wardrobe malfunction. He tries to grab Batman, but Batman just dodges. He's like liquid smoke. He's really hard to hit. Which does not make him look very much like Batman's image. He's elusive more so than a tough, grizzled martial artist, although clearly he's not a bad fighter. Muscles is like, that's it. I'm ending this. I'm going to super leap onto him and just grab him. So I had him roll. And he failed this roll. His dice were bad. The curse just rolls on, honestly, with poor Muscles. He jumped into the air high, came down. Of course, Batman dodged out of the way, and he crashed in and through the ring, getting caught up to his waist in it. Now, of course, he could just reach in and rip the ring in half. Easily strong enough to do that. But Batman followed up, pulled out a bat taser, and got him right in the ear with it. And Muscles blew his roll and got knocked out by the taser. So, he lost to Batman. Poor Muscles. And then the final battle was the slender guy against the middleweight Batman, and he won. So he is officially the owner of the Batman name. The others will have to change their names, but they'll figure out something. Any rate, so they got to see that. It was a little bit of an anticlimax because the coolest looking Batman wasn't the winner, but, you know, Bulwark was impressed the way he outthought the others and eventually outthought Muscles. So, yeah, he'll probably do okay for himself, quite honestly. He's easy to underestimate. So, as far as the rest of them in terms of getting into fights and everything, they were all expecting me to drop the hammer. They were ready for the ambush. They were ready for the explosion. They were ready for the shock. It's a convention. And it was actually really well managed. There was plenty of security. There was martial security because the German government was actually okay with this event taking place, especially since all members of the government were automatically allowed to go through Respite's healing aura. Yeah, they brightened up to that perk real quick. So they were all cleared of COVID. So that's nice for them. But at the same time, it did really kind of bring the mood that they weren't in imminent danger. They seemed like they were doing pretty well. So they ate some con food and they went to the next stretch, which again, Bulwark went and he investigated and visited with Respite. The other ones took a look at the job fair that was offered, because there's a number of employers who would love to have some of these gifted working for them. There's a couple that they knew were already locked up. For example, Stand-In. Stand-In is capable of completely metamorphing himself into another person. But in his case, it's somebody that he studies. And as a theater person, he is really good in classic movies. So he can instantly become any number of famous actors, including deceased ones. So he could be a perfect fill-in for Humphrey Bogart or Elvis Presley or, you know, even Marilyn Monroe. He could do all of these different actors, and Hollywood has him locked up. He doesn't need to face danger ever, and he's got a job with whoever they can get rights to. So, yeah, from voice to looks, it's perfect. He's got a really interesting ability. They also saw Blue. Blue is a humanoid, mostly. Completely blue. All parts of him are blue. Even his eyes are light blue. But he's also a metamorph in that he can change his shape into non-human shapes. So he can form geometric shapes, and people were looking at his abilities and thinking about the different jobs and applications his abilities could do. Several of them were from the entertainment industries, and we're looking at some of these talents. For example, Von Waltz has abilities to inspire people to dance. Although he prefers to dress up like Frederic Chopin, he actually has a range of abilities, and the music industry was paying attention to him. They got to see a lot of people interested. Rook, in particular, went to kind of check things out, and Rook got bombarded. Apparently, his communications abilities have been outed. He wasn't aware of it because most of his stuff is internal, but people have found out. He's actually not been as subtle as he thinks he is in some of the things that he's been able to do. And at the very least, his ability to shut down communications in a given area also could make him extraordinarily valuable to a number of people. So he got blasted with people who were wanting to employ him, which he turned down. The most compelling thing possibly was a group of scientists who were really curious about the interface that he has between technology and his brain. The fact that he has a purely organic operating system in his head that allows him to interface with computers, and protocols for a variety of data devices and communication devices. It's potentially fascinating if you look beyond just his application of it, but he kind of turned them down. He didn't want to be a guinea pig or anything like that. Plus, to him, I think superpowers are just cool, I got powers, and doesn't really want to think about beyond that. So, so be it. Bulwark, for the most part, had a good time with his sister. Psy Ghost, of course, was absent. So she and DeVille were having a pretty good time. Eventually, Muscles wasn't really happy with how things had turned out in his little brawl. So he decided he still wanted to get into a fight with somebody to even the score. And he hadn't been in a fight in a while. I guess I couldn't blame him too much. So he eventually found that they have a combat arena. And they are offering the ability to let supers go at it. There's a super named Paradigm who is able to change the rules of physics in a given area to his whim. What exactly that means? Can he cancel gravity? Yes. There's a lot of things that he can do, but a lot of it is more than just the obvious things about obvious physical laws. So he can actually allow people to fight and be completely safe despite the fact they're using deadly superpowers and incredible strength. So Muscles signed up. He just wanted to get into a fight, and there's a couple of people in the guest list who also wanted to fight. And he got into a draw with Demon Lord Demonicus. Now, Demon Lord Demonicus is a gifted. He's not a Demon Lord. He is just basically a guy in a purple cloak, really nice suit. Kind of goes for this infernal looking thing, but he doesn't pull it off obviously as well as Hank does. But he has the ability to open up portals, and he can summon creatures of fire and also project fire himself, his Hellfire blasts. Now, he's not a beta level. He is a delta level, so he's powerful, but not quite, in the sphere of somebody like Muscles. But Muscles has only really shown off his brute strength at this point. So while Mr. Demonicus was not really happy with the prospect of having to take on Muscles, who is, again, rather infamous for his power, he agreed to the fight. So they got into this fight. It's heavily televised, and they got to have a brawl. Now, basically, Demonicus walked in with 2 Hellhounds, one of his stronger fire constructs, and he immediately tried to sick them on Muscles. But Muscles has been in the superpower game for a while. He didn't wait for them to come. He super jumped in so that he could get right in after Demonicus. Demonicus is throwing fireballs at him, and it turns out they really work well on Muscles because Muscles doesn't have any resistance to energy attacks, and he was not dodging for anything. So I was rolling 1s and scoring hits on him, no problem. He was having a difficult time just landing a shot. As a matter of fact, in the opening, he didn't so much as touch Demonicus, who has just enough personal defense that he's slippery. He's slippery. And she was just missing him. Just missing. But eventually, Demonicus was kind of getting nervous that Muscles was too close, so he opened up a portal and tried to get his dogs to shove Muscles through. Muscles grabs Demonicus and squeezes, he hurt, and threw him back through the portal. So he goes through his own portal. The dogs vanish, and Demonicus reappears in the middle of the ring. Weakened, gasping for breath. He tries throwing a fiery pitchfork at Muscles. He hits him again. He hit him with a couple of his fiery attacks. He's got an area fire attack, which drains him tremendously. One of the biggest problems that Demonicus has is that one of his weaknesses is that he's got a crippled power reserve. He doesn't have a lot of power to throw around. And his summoned creatures tax him quite a bit. When he actually does direct fire damage, it really drains him. So he's on fumes at this point. When finally Muscles connects, drops him to the ground, and then punches him straight up into the ceiling. This really did kind of reveal the pseudo-reality that Paradigm projected. American professional wrestling. So while these blows look convincing as heck, neither one of them was seriously injured. They just, a bit battered, but for the most part, when the fight was over, they both were able to get up and, walk away. Muscles did score the win. He even tried corrosive spitting on him, but he missed. Demonicus was a slippery character. But ultimately, he was not in the same league as Muscles, and he got beaten. So Muscles was probably feeling a little bit better about that. Now Muscles had signed up for a Q&A for the evening, or the opening day. At the same time, we also have Bulwark, who signed up for a panel himself on the following day, so that he could basically talk about the future of the Gifted, the direction the Gifted are going to do, and the world and how it's going to change. It's one of the big keynote things that suddenly popped up and everybody's interested. So they all did their various things. Again, they looked at what was going on, and I'm sure that if I'm missing anything, I'm going to hear about it. But the entire night was just kind of crazy and bubbling over with people various things poking around, but again, a lot of them were just kind of watching over their shoulders the entire time, which was cute. So in the end, there was a VIP supper, which they were invited to. They got to meet P. Diddy again. Yes, he was at the VIP supper, as were most of the Gifted who were there. They ate, drank. It was really good food. But ultimately, the Muscles had to get ready for his event, which was coming up. So he went to this Q&A in his nice suit. And again, Muscles opening up a Q&A was kind of an interesting thing, because there were a variety of people. And if you've ever seen one of these Comic-Con Q&A panels or anything like that, some of them can be cringy, some of them can be kind of shocking. So he was throwing a lot of softball questions that we really weren't going to cover, relatively easy ones. He had to deal with somebody who was like pestering him on some of his bad scripts that he'd had as a B-movie actor. So of course his movie critics came out of the woodwork and started needling him. But the folks from Supers actually prevented him from, having to go and wade into the crowd. So he was spared for the most part until the very end. I thought he did a pretty good job of deflecting things, and he made his cool test just enough. But finally, somebody came up and said, "All right, well, we've all seen the video of you doing what you did to that woman. Do you think that women should be threatened when you're around? Is this a pattern that we should be worried about with you and violence towards women?" And it was definitely one of those targeted, incendiary questions. But it was something that was probably going to come up, and Muscles didn't handle it well. He's like, "Well, I love the women. I'm not a danger to women anymore." Probably. That didn't come off with the humor that he wanted, and he botched his cool tests. And he's got one of the better cools of the group. But he blew his tests. So, again, he didn't win that round either, and it came off kind of poor. He also was challenged for his name by Mr. Muscle. Mr. Muscle is not a huge, towering colossus of muscle, as Muscles is. Mr. Muscle is a guy in a trench coat. Looks like he's fairly fit, but the fact is he's gifted and he has enhanced strength, clearly. But they challenged each other to a fight for the name, so if Muscle's bad luck streak continues the next day, he may not be able to call Muscles anymore. Could be really interesting. For the most part, though, in the night, it was allowing everybody to kind of do a little bit of what they wanted to do. Everybody did show up to Muscles Q&A to support him and make sure nothing bad happened. And for the most part, while they laughed at the ribbing that he got, and they were there basically to protect and support him, and for the most part, things went fairly well. So basically, throughout all of this chaos, throughout all of these things with the sponsors, with Supers kind of lining things up, and various other mysterious backers and everything, there was one thing that happened that was kind of a little on the sketchy side. As the job fair thing was wrapping up, Sentinel, who's the suspicious sort, noticed a shadowy figure walking out of the job fair after having talked to one of the Gifted. and he was deliberately shady. I mean, shaded. You couldn't see his details, which caught his attention. He was trying not to be noticed, but he was trying too hard not to be noticed, and that immediately had all the alarm bells ringing for Sentinel. So Sentinel let Bulwark know, and they pursued. Now, they chased him through the hall, and the guy found out, because Sentinel's not stealthy, that he was being pursued. So, ironically, the person who has the obvious appearance thing that Takeshi does was not the guy who was seen, but he's a lot more nimble. So he ran through the crowd, eventually getting out. Now, Takeshi went intangible. That's a huge advantage when going through crowds. He just ghosted right through the wall at the same time the guy was getting out the door himself. Sentinel was bodged up by the crowd. The shadowy guy ran over to a car, opened the door, got in. Takeshi ran over, jumped into the car, went tangible. His accuracy needs a little bit of work. He actually ended up clipping into some of the padding of the seat, and he took a little damage for doing that. That's something he's going to learn not to do. But he's like, "Hi, how you doing?" Went tense. Because the guy turned, saw him there, and fed him an elbow. Which, hurt. So the guy knows how to throw an elbow. So Takeshi went dense, and the car just kind of sagged, because all of a sudden, the car weighs, 1,500 more pounds, and this is just a small sedan. So it's driving, and it hits a speed bump, and since the bottom of the car is down, and it hits it at speed, rips the oil pan and scrapes along the bottom, and the entire thing wobbles, and the car slides over to its side. Now, there was a brief exchange, and in that exchange, Takeshi found out that the person's voice was electronically modified. But he could tell there's something familiar about the guy's profile. I don't know how he did it, but I got to give him credit for being one of those deep thinkers about the game. He deduced successfully, and I basically had confirmed, the person was Slade, who is one of Warbridge's staffers. He was one of the ones who taught various members of the group combat techniques, because he himself had been a mercenary. He had been a fighter around the world, knowing all the dirty tricks of fighting, and some of the professional ones too. So when he fed him that elbow, it was a skilled attack. When he sprang out of the car when it tipped over, it's clear that the guy is used to dealing with different circumstances. And he ran off. Sorta. As he did that, Bulwark had Sentinel had disentangled himself from the crowd, came out, and as he saw him getting ready to leave, he fired a repulsor blast, caught him right in the head, flipped him head over tea kettle, and slammed onto the ground. As he picked himself up, he hit something on his belt and teleported away in a glow of white. Now, Takeshi noticed he didn't use a gift. That was a gadget. Who has access to stuff like that? Who has those level of fighting skills? Who might be interested in getting into some of the new gifted that have exposed themselves? The plot thickens. There's different layers going on here at the convention, so it certainly sets up things for the next session. So, hopefully you've enjoyed this. Now, I understand that because of various circumstances, I wasn't exactly at my best. I was a little bit tired, a little bit lightheaded through the whole thing. If I've missed details, and I'm sure I skimmed over some, if you watch this and these details are important to you, as they should be, if you were there, use the comments and remind me of the things I missed. I would appreciate that, because I like to be thorough in these things, and unfortunately, while I know I hit most of the bullet points, I also know that, I know that Psyghost wasn't there for a lot of it. But I have a feeling that I'm missing some of the individual points. So if you want those commemorated, leave them in the comments. I will comment and certify the different things that have happened. So, but that was another exciting night. And they're right in the middle of GiftedCon at the end of the first day. So, fun times. If you enjoyed this, make sure you subscribe and pay attention. We'll continue this 2 weeks from now. So, thank you very much for joining me. I am Rob. This has been my State of the Dungeon address. Carry on, true believers. Next time we'll have even more excitement. Until then, thank you and farewell.